Welcome everybody to the Sales War Chest webinar, which is all about helping businesses and all the folks out there to grow revenue in uncertain times. And this week's webinar, of course, is, here we go, all about working with freelancers and consultants, your innovative approach to scaling up in a changed market. So very exciting to have Anita Perkins from Anita Perkins Consulting here today, and also James Fuller from Henry. We haven't got lots of slides because this is an interactive discussion, and it's going to be wonderful to hear what James and Anita have got to share. Anita, shall we get you to just tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get James to tell us a little bit about you, and then we can kick off the discussion. I'll stop sharing so we can see you a bit better. There we go. Okay, there we go. Who would like to start?
Sure. So my name's Anita Perkins. I've been self-employed since late 2018. I'm really passionate about doing work that helps with positive social and environmental outcomes. I would call myself a research and policy consultant. I have quite an academic background, having done my PhD in German literature, and then had a number of years working for different government organisations and policy roles, mostly focused on international relations and environment and conservation areas. Really excited to be here, and thanks very much for organising, and super excited to be on the same panel as James, who I've watched present many times, and I'm a big fan of his company, so that's excellent. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Oh, James, love to hear a little bit about you and how Henry came to be and everything.
Sure. Thanks, Anita. That's really nice. I think it's, you know, for me, I always describe myself as being a reformed management consultant. I worked for a number of years for Deloitte back in my suit and tie days, both in the UK and here in New Zealand. And after quite a long time in consulting, I decided to go out on my own and work independently. So I became a contractor, worked in the startup scene, worked in banks and government as an independent contractor. And as part of being a contractor for a number of years, became very tired of the financial admin that comes along with being a contractor, things like taxes and invoicing and payments and expenses, and having to feel like I was my own little sort of mini accountant. So yeah, we started off sort of 4 or 5 years ago. I created a spreadsheet that helped me understand how much tax I needed to pay, and some friends went out contracting and asked me what I did, and I said, well, I handle my financial admin through my wonderful spreadsheet. And then yeah, we suddenly realized that actually the problem that I'd solved for myself, just because I'm lazy, was actually a problem that a lot of other people have experienced. So we created a business out of it, and 4 years or so ago, we launched Henry. And yeah, we're now the fastest growing tax agent in New Zealand. We have thousands of customers on our books, everything from gig economy workers through to physiotherapists, contractors, freelancers. Yeah, and we take care of all of their financial admin for them. So for us, this is a really exciting time to see across the broader spectrum of the independent earning economy, how people are starting to turn to kind of independent contractors and consultants as a way of becoming more agile organizations.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, isn't it? I'll just put one little slide up. We're not going to have slides all day because we want to hear from you guys. But oh, have I shared my screen? I hope I have. Can you all see that slide? No.
Just yet?
No, perhaps not quite. So let's just try that again. Let's push share screen. There we go. So here we are. Oops, next one. So hopefully you can see the snakes and ladders board.
No.
No. Okay. We'll just leave that for now. I'm still developing some of my Zoom skills, so we'll leave that one for now. But essentially there was a picture up of a snakes and ladders board, and of course the game Snakes and Ladders is all about trying to progress up to the square 100. Whoever gets there first wins. And I was briefly saying to Anita just before we opened up the webinar here that really that's what's happened, isn't it? That we were all progressing, or most of us were progressing fairly nicely along the board, and we knew what was happening. And now a whole bunch of people feel like they've had a big tumble down a snake and gone down to square 24. And, you know, how do you climb back up again? And really that's almost brings us to the first sort of thing that we were hoping to discuss today, So for dynamic and agile resourcing opportunities, what does the future look like for contractors and freelancers and consultants in terms of dynamic and agile resourcing opportunities? James, what are your thoughts around some of that?
I think that for a number of years, I think contractors, freelancers, consultants have been ready for a world of more dynamic resourcing. I think traditionally organizations have employed contractors on sort of 3-6-month contracts, sometimes 12-month contracts. But I think we've seen a lot of the contractor market have been very comfortable with lots of different frequencies of engagement. And I think that when we've got a lot of organizations that are now looking at the way that they resource and saying, how do we adjust dynamically? How do we resource based on the demands of our business? And rather than just go and hire a whole bunch of permanent staff that we then have to think about utilizing and getting the most value from, how can we look to the contingent workforce to provide value on an on-demand basis? I think you've got a whole economy of independent contractors that are more than ready to take up the mantle here and have been very used to, over the past sort of 5-10 years, being brought into organizations to really drive value and bring a lot of insight. So I think what we're starting to see now is more and more people adopting independent earning and coming away from permanent employment. So it's this beautiful kind of perfect storm where organizations are now looking to resource more dynamically and in a more kind of agile and on-demand way, at the same time as a lot of individuals are starting to see that being a contractor isn't the risky thing that it might have been many years ago, and it's actually, there's such low barriers to entry to get into contracting that it's a real push from a lot of people to come out of permanent work and start sort of taking the leap into contracting.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing opportunity, isn't it, if we can grasp it as a nation. What sort of thoughts have you got to add there, Anita, around dynamic and agile resourcing and I guess what the future could look like for us?
Well, I think just to add to what James is saying and to kind of put it into the kind of COVID-19 context, there's a lot of organizations who are going to be feeling like they're going back to the drawing board and kind of asking, where can we go? What are we going to do? And there might be some people who are sort of thinking short term, how are we going to survive? And just, how are we going to get through this next period? And there might be others who are thinking longer term and maybe have more resource. And doing a stock take and a bit of a pivot of where they might go given this context. And I think there's a real opportunity to use and draw on the resources of freelancers, because there was a study in 2018 that said there are 140,000 self-employed people, which made up 5% of the employed population in New Zealand. And the thing is that if you are sort of thinking in that short-term survival mode, then I think, as James said, contractors can provide an opportunity for you to bring people in and keep the cogs turning, but not have to employ permanent staff when you're unsure about whether that's financially viable for you or not. And if you're thinking more longer term, then I think sometimes there's a great opportunity to bring someone in who's got sort of a fresh set of eyes and can go out and really work with your stakeholders and think about how you can thrive and do really well and even come out more sort of sustainable and environmental or social ways as well. And the other things like this is like a really unforeseen time, but for a lot of contractors and freelancers, it's not really a huge new way of working and it's not a huge adjustment. So there's quite a lot to learn from that in terms of we're used to remote working, we're used to being nimble, we're used to kind of setting longer term frameworks, but then having to adjust those to the needs of clients, being creative and reinventing ourselves and all that kind of stuff. So I think we really can offer some new insights and experience that can help add for people who are feeling really kind of overwhelmed and stuck in this period at the moment, which can be quite daunting for people.
Yeah, I know. I've talked to a few business owners and a lot of people obviously are very concerned about Q2 of the full year of 2020, which here we are in Q2 and we've spent probably a third of that quarter in lockdown. And some businesses will be thriving, some will have had to pivot and adapt, and others will be a little bit frozen in time. I know you wrote a really good post on LinkedIn, which a whole bunch of us got commenting on, about the ways that contractors deliver value. What sort of value do you think could happen for a business right now? They're looking at quarter 2. They're not sure how that will pan out. Quarter 3, what's that? You know, July, August, September, not really sure. What do you think a contractor could deliver for a business that's really in that uncertain place, Anita?
Well, I think some of the things I just said before about the kind of experience that we have and we can come in, there's a lot of things where, you know, a contractor will bring in, have a lot of networks because we're really all about building reputation relationships. So we can bring those networks into the organisation. We've often worked across a number of different areas. And so we can bring the learning and insight from all those different experiences and help sort of contribute that to your organisation as well. As I said before as well, sometimes coming in and having a bit of a fresh set of eyes about what's working and what's not working can be really helpful. We can come up to speed quickly. I think a lot of people who sort of take the leap to become a freelancer are really passionate about what they do. And so they're really motivated. They want to deliver value. They want to keep up their reputation. And they're often really engaged in like sort of geeky immersion of the latest trends and what's going on. So I think they really bring things. In terms of organizations, like from my own experience, some of the government departments I'm working for have moved to kind of matrix models of working as well, where people's certain skill sets and expertise are sort of used in a way that they can be pulled in and out of different projects as sort of an agile method according to what's needed. I think there's also ways that I've been working in a little bit more recently too, where there might be an organisation who has a certain set of needs and a bunch of contractors can come together and collaborate to give them exactly what it is that they need as well. So possibly rather than employing one person permanently full-time, you might be able to get a bunch of contractors with different expertise coming in and delivering exactly what you need and having that real wide set of skills that's really going to, you know, hit the mark in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So there's so many possibilities and ways of doing things that I think, you know, freelancers and consultants and contractors can really add value to.
Yeah, oh no, definitely, yeah. And I know, James, you've had some thoughts too on the sort of value that contractors can deliver. I know you were talking with me the other day about when a contractor or a consultant is working in a business or an organisation, you're not focused on some of the political stuff, you're really just focused on doing an amazing job. Do you want to share a little bit about that with the people here today? We've got a question which we'll come to after James has shared a bit, but what do you think, James, about
Sure.
that?
I mean, I think, you know, the contractors that obviously we work with, Henry, and then obviously my own experience of contracting, just as Anita was saying, people are coming into contracting, they're coming to client sites, they're getting up to speed quickly and providing a lot of value. And occasionally you get this situation that I got to with one of the banks where they like your working style, they like the fact that you're driving lots of value for their business, and they say to you, hey, look, why don't you come on board permanently? And a lot of contractors do get approached in that way. And I think for those people who are confident in their abilities as a contractor, as I was at the time, I said to them, hey, look, I don't think that you want me to be a permanent member of staff, because as soon as I'm a permanent member of staff, I care about my career progression. I care about playing political games to make sure that I can get ahead of other people. I said, you don't want me to be that employee. You want me to be a specialist contractor that's going to come in and deliver on a specific job or role or whatever, and you don't want me worrying about, you know, where am I going to get my next benefits, or where does my next pay rise come from, or, you know, what's everyone else doing versus what am I doing? And I think a lot of contractors, you know, always have that mode of working, which is they're very focused, as Anita says, on getting that reputation of demonstrating value, of leaving organizations better than they were when they arrived. So, you know, going into an organization and providing the benefit of your knowledge, of your networks, of your thinking, and being able to bring that external perspective in a way that, you know, if that same person were a permanent member of staff, they have slightly different priorities, they have slightly different things that matter most to them. So in my experience, you get a very different style of value depending on whether you've got a contract resource or consulting resource versus a permanent resource. And that might not be a huge difference between the two, but certainly I think contractors almost have to kind of fend for themselves in every single job. So turning up at a client, the first thing that you're going to do in the first 2 weeks is try and impress and try and make sure that you're seen to be worth the investment of the hourly rate or the daily rate that they're paying. Not to say that permanent staff don't do the same thing, but for contractors, there is that underlying fear that if I do not deliver every single day of the week, there is a chance that someone would say, I'm sorry, this is not a role that we're going to continue staffing you in. And it's a very easy thing for them to do. So contractors, rather than let the organization be in the position of power and be the person that determines whether or not someone stays or goes, they like to over deliver and say, actually, I'm going to make it an inevitability that I get extended because that's my income source. That's what, you know, that I don't have an option of, you know, quickly switching contracts to something else. You know, actually, I need to sing for my supper every single day and prove value to an organization so that I do get extended, so that I do get good networks and good referrals. And I think that's a sort of mindset that any contractor or freelancer I come across all have that same mindset. And, you know, conversely, not a lot of organizations, I think, understand that mindset. I think they sort of, you know, there's a bit of maturity that's required from organizations' perspective to kind of realize a bit more about the value of contractors versus permanent staff.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I actually think as well is if you're not sure if you need a whole person or a permanent person or for how long this project should be, having someone in a contract role means that you actually get to try that out. You actually get to feel what it would be like if I had that role filled. And then what if that person's really good and they do the project twice as quickly as you thought? You've probably answered your own long-term resourcing questions. So I think if you're not sure as a business, I think it gives you a tremendous opportunity to trial that out. I'm just noticing there's a wee question there. It's great to have a question. Anyone else with a question? Now, I learned last week you have to read questions out. So I shall read the question out. There we are. So we've got, oh, thank you, Jokin. I hope that's how you say your name. You might have to correct me on that one. So the first question is, what place do you think automated platforms have in the contractor space, such as Upwork? And then, Jokin, you're obviously responding to James. You've said, and in response to James's comment, where do you think contractors sit that have multiple clients at the same time? Should we answer the multiple clients at the same time question and then go on to the automated platforms question?
Sure, I can probably cover, I think my answer will probably cover both, to be fair. And I think for me, this is about kind of having a diversity of income streams. So, you know, I think many years ago, it was sort of the tendency for contractors, for instance, to look for a single client for a long-term basis. However, what we're seeing now is organizations and individuals being far more comfortable with having many, many income streams all working concurrently. And that might mean that I perhaps have 2 local clients that I do maybe 2.5 days of each, or even 2 days of each. And I may use platforms like Fiverr or Upwork to work remotely for other people. I may earn income from a number of different ways. And I think what we're seeing is a level of comfort that people have with operating in multiple different modes. And I think organizations themselves are getting more comfortable with employing contractors that might work for other clients as well. So I have, for instance, at Henry, our graphic designer, Tracy, is fantastic. And there is no way that I could employ her on a permanent contract, not because I probably couldn't afford her, but also because we don't have 5 days a week, 40 hours of graphic design work that needs doing. But Tracy also has other clients that she works for. And that's what the value that she brings to our organization is, that she gets that diversity of experience, that diversity of thought. And so for us, there is more value in Tracy having 5 other clients that she works for than there is trying to kind of bring Tracy in full time into our organization and then find things to do, you know, for 40 hours a week. So I think both of those questions are kind of answered by this idea that actually, as contractors, as freelancers, we should be looking to diversify our income streams to kind of de-risk the impacts of things, whether it's COVID or a contract finishing or something else, you know, and actually having a kind of portfolio of skills, portfolio of income sources that we can then kind of dial up and down based on demand. And actually it's the organizations themselves that need to get more comfortable with the fact that actually you get a better contractor if they are working across multiple places. And I think there's huge value in those contractors who are, can operate either full-time for one client or part-time. And it's about having the conversation with the organization to say, how much of my time would you like? And then being able to flex your own kind of utilization, so to speak, to make sure that you can deliver on what you need to for anything that you're currently working on, either face-to-face or online.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. Anita, what are your thoughts around some of that? Oh, JD, thank you. JD says, thanks for the thorough answer. It was an awesome answer. I know you've got some wonderful thoughts too, Anita. Have you got anything you'd like to pop in response to that? The thought of having multiple clients at the one time, and even the thought about automated platforms such as Upwork and what space those sorts of automated platforms might have.
Well, I would just give a shout out to two New Zealand platforms. One is called the Unicorn Factory and the other one is called the Freelance Village. So if you have a preference to work with New Zealand freelancers, then you might want to check out those kind of platforms as well. For me personally, I would consider myself a person who, I don't know if you've heard of the term multi-potentialite, but I have interest in a lot of different things. So as a freelancer, I really like that kind of mode of working. And at the moment, I have some work for the Department of Conservation and Biodiversity Policy. I'm also doing some research for a book that's coming out on the history of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And I'm also doing some research for a website on purpose-driven business that John Holt is bringing out later. So, and I've also got a couple of kind of pitches going on for work in the future. So I quite like that way of working, and I think more and more that's kind of the way that people would tend to work rather than having big blocks. But that's one of the attractive things for people who are freelancing. Like last year I decided to go to Europe for 6 weeks, so I was able to build my work around that. But it's also the advantage for organizations who can say, look, I don't need a full-time person, I just need someone 2 days a week, as James was kind of saying, or I actually only have this job that's going to need 10 hours, I just want someone to edit this thing I've done. So there's so much flexibility there, and some of those automated platforms can really help connect people in a quick way without costing a lot of money, I think.
I had this conversation, I think it was yesterday, I was talking to someone about it and saying that actually with the impacts of something like COVID, I think contractors themselves are going to need to continue to adapt. I think we obviously, there's a very adaptive group of workers, but I think we're going to need to continue to adapt to think about different that we can package offer services. And I think with a lot of organizations who are going to be coming off the back of level 4 and into level 3 and looking at what the future means for their organization, there is going to be some risk aversion. There's going to be less opportunity for them to want to commit to something long term. And I had a question yesterday from someone saying, as a contractor who my client wasn't able to continue on with my contract through level 4, what would you suggest? And my advice is always to look at how you package your services and package your time, and actually look for the opportunities with those organizations that probably wouldn't be able to afford to employ you on a 5-day a week contract, but would genuinely love the value of a consultant, maybe a couple of hours a week. And we have the same thing with a marketing consultant that we work with, Alan Sharp, who is a classic example of someone who probably has 5 or 6 clients that he does maybe a few hours a week on each. And so his hourly rate and the way that he packages his service is tailored not to the fact that he's going to do 5 days a week, 40 hours, but that actually he's going to do 2 hours a week, specific outcome-based work. And he works with us and he works with our marketing coordinator, and it drives genuine value into our business. So he's kind of packaged his service in sort of like a micro service that he can go and approach startups like ourselves, or I suppose we're a stay up now, but we refer him to a bunch of the startup community who couldn't afford a kind of longer term consultancy, and so they go to Alan and say, look, we'd love to just maybe get an hour of your time a week just to come and sense check things and prompt things. And by making your service affordable to a broader range of the market, rather than assuming that someone's going to commit to 5 days a week of your time, you make yourself more saleable. And whilst you might be spreading across multiple clients, most of us are organized people who are quite, like Anita says, quite able to manage life around particular client commitments, whether that's for one client or 5 clients.
Which is brilliant, actually, yeah. And there's another thought that we had. We talked about where and how freelancers and contractors add value. We've probably covered a lot of those points. I think we'll probably go back to them, though, because that's just such an opportunity for New Zealand businesses and for the world right now, isn't it? The ways that we already know that we need to keep out of the fridge and keep focused because we're contractors. So if you want someone who can work independently and work remotely, look to the contractor workforce really as a big way forward. And we also wanted to touch really on contractor well-being and how do you manage freelancers and contractors, which also spills into how do you operate as an organization with your freelancer or your contractor. How do you make that person feel like, you know what, I want to stay committed to you even when other offers come because you're a great space to be. James, what are your thoughts on that, do you think?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's, we always talk about kind of, back in my days of working with kind of large organizations that hire permanent staff, we used to talk about attracting and retaining top talent. And it's a phrase that gets bandied around quite a lot. But I think what we're seeing now is that organizations are actually applying that to contractors and to contingent workers, particularly in an economy like New Zealand that's quite small. It's very well networked. Those organizations that treat their contractors well will be able to get repeat business from those contractors. And so in a market where the contractors hold a little bit more of the power, and a market where there's more demand for contractors, contractors have a choice of who they work for. And they can say, do you know what? I'm not going to work for that organization or that agency because they didn't treat me well as a contractor. And I've, as a consultant, when I was working for Deloitte, I was very used to walking into government departments and being told that myself and my team would have to sit in a little office by ourselves and we wouldn't really be interacting with the rest of the staff. And all of that kind of separation just breeds suspicion, and it just breeds a really bad atmosphere and a bad relationship towards contractors and consultants. So there were certain clients that I would not really want to go and win work with. I would not want to go and work for them because of the fact I didn't think myself and my team would have a good experience. So applying that from a contractor perspective, you look at, we always talk about Weta Workshop and Weta Digital. They're just fantastic organizations in Wellington that are mostly staffed by contract resource. And if you imagine, they're obviously not bringing people on permanently because the film and TV industry is all based on kind of production of content. But if you imagine if Weta weren't as good with their contractors as they are, and if they mistreated those contractors, the next time they have an avatar come up and they say, right, we need the best visual effects specialists, if those people haven't been treated well by Weta, they're going to go, I can go and work somewhere else. I'm going to go down to a different production company. I'm going to go to Flying Fish or somewhere else. I can go and apply my talents elsewhere. So suddenly attracting and retaining top talent applies to contingent workers, and organizations are having to actually become, again, a bit more mature and say, if we want the best contract workers to be able to have an agile, dynamic workforce, we need to treat them like they are part of this workforce rather than excluding them with different colored passes. And, you're not talking about giving them the same benefits in terms of salary benefits as you would for permanent staff, but they're sort of trying to ingratiate them a little more and be a little less kind of exclusive with your organization is a way of ingratiating contractors and, again, just getting far more value out of them.
Oh, Anita, I'd love to hear your thoughts. James, that was awesome. Thank you.
Well, I know, I've had some conversations with Alan Hux, who's James's colleague at Henry, and there are a lot of discussions out there about the well-being of contractors and freelancers. I read this morning in an article by Dr. Stephen Blumenfield, who's from the Labour Employment and Work School of Management at Victoria Uni. And he was talking about MB last year was looking at some of the legal rights of kind of gig economy workers. And he was afraid that this work might be deprioritized because of the COVID-19 situation. So there definitely are people out there who are thinking about the rights and the well-being and all that kind of stuff of contractor and freelance workers. I've talked a little bit with Vito Loiakono. We're thinking of possibly doing some courses or training for people who are around well-being and different styles and professional development for people who are working in this kind of way. I think in terms of what organizations can do to try and attract people, as James said, we're just people as well, and we like to work in cool teams and we like to go back to good workplaces. We like to have good relationships. So we're just like everyone else in that way. So sometimes it's not even about the money. It might be that you just had a really great experience in a place, or they had a really, like, they had free coffee for their workers. I don't know what it is, but you know, if they put in a little bit of extra effort to make it a cool place to be, then you're going to want to be there, and you're going to want to refer your friends to be there as well. I think there's definitely a point about communication. If there's a situation where the expectations aren't clear and we didn't deliver what the client wanted, then that can be really disappointing. So like having a really good kind of scoping phase to begin with, and regular check-ins about what you want and whether you're getting what you wanted is really good. And then maybe even if you've got time, having a bit of a session at the end and thinking, how did you get from A to B? What value did the contractor add? And if you are happy with their performance, then you might want to provide them a testimonial or a shout out on LinkedIn, or you might want to pass a reference on to other people to take that person. And one other thing I saw on LinkedIn, which was just a little tip, I think it was John Holt might have written it, is just things like common sense that you would expect, like pay people promptly. Like a lot of what we do is built on trust. There aren't always huge, complicated legal contracts set up for every single aspect of things. So there's a lot of stuff that's built on trust. So just treat people with sort of decency as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that, you know, we can look at it now and say, you know, this is what aspirationally how we would like to be treated and how we want to operate. But if you look at what we should be doing, you do look at those organizations that are that genuinely have like a mature working model with their contractors, they're able to successfully leverage that sort of hybrid workforce of a base of permanent staff, dialing up and down with contingent workers as and when they need for specialist services. And actually the value that they get out of that is that they have these kind of collaborative teams of both internal and external resources that they can attract people back into when they need. And like Anita's saying, it's that referral network. And we do see some organizations that do this very, very well. Unfortunately, there are a number of organizations out there that sort of have this approach of assuming that contract resource is expendable resource. That it's like, well, if we bring in contractors, you know, that we can just get rid of them when times get difficult. And actually, I think what we're seeing post-COVID is that a lot of organizations are actually starting to realize that they need to take the opposite approach, which is actually, if we stand by our contractors and we have these people who are delivering value for us, if we suddenly pull the plug now, we're going to lose those people because they are good contractors. They'll go up and pick contracts elsewhere. They probably won't come back to us. And so suddenly you're looking at, you know, when you start to think more about kind of your resource mix and how you resource your organization, starting to think about actually the value that contractors bring in is not something that should just be easily discarded. It's not the first thing on the balance sheet that goes. And really for, you know, for organizations that look on contractors as being a valuable part of their organization, and sort of Weta is obviously in the film and TV industry is a big one of those, but also even companies like Courier Post, where all their couriers are independent contractors. The entire lifeblood of an organization rests on a group of contingent workers. They don't have the luxury of saying, well, you know, we'll just sort of strip out a whole bunch of contractors when we need to, because that's the thing that keeps their business going. So I think we're seeing almost, there are some organizations in certain industries that are setting the standard for how to treat contractors fairly. And there are others who are maybe more mainstream organizations that you might expect to be better at dealing with contractors, who are still operating in this sort of us and them model, or like these contractors aren't as much value as a permanent member of staff.
Yeah. Or, you know, even one of the things I've noticed as well on the work with Magnify is even just letting you into their tools is part of it, you know. So if there's a Slack channel at your organization, you've got a contract policy analyst or a salesperson or a contract business analyst, and the whole team is on Slack, let that person be on Slack with you, because then as opportunities come up and they go, oh, you know, from my experience, I can actually add this in. But if they're not on your communication channels, they won't be able to add their full value.
Absolutely. And Anita, you mentioned trust when it comes to kind of, you know, from a payments perspective, but trust is such a massive factor that if you're not showing your contractors that you trust them enough to put them on your Slack channel or give them access to tools, then you're not doing them the sort of the courtesy of letting them come into your organization and provide the right value. It's almost like you're sort of chopping someone off at the knees. You kind of bring them in and saying, hey, come and bring all this value, but you're not allowed on Slack. You're not allowed anywhere near the coffee machine. Don't go in that room. You know, it's a weird way of operating. So, and I know, Anita, you've probably had in your career, you've probably had a few instances where you felt that potentially the trust maybe wasn't there with clients.
I think it's mostly been pretty good. I think in my approach, there's a lot of conversations and kind of exchange of documents and emails that go on before you even start working sometimes. But there's different approaches as well. Like I've worked on contract in a couple of different government departments now, and you know, one interview was literally we sat down and had a coffee, and the manager told me all about the work program, and then said, well, if you want to start, just let us know tomorrow. And there's another situation where it was like a full-on job interview. So it can really depend. But like with this work I'm doing at Doc at the moment, it's great because, you know, I've worked with them before, and I've come in and I'm working and filling in gaps as the requirements change across 2 different projects in the same team. And sometimes you kind of pick up one thing from one side and then connect the dots on the other, or you've read something on LinkedIn that you can bring into the policy considerations as well. So I can see they're like totally trusting of me, and it's awesome. So yeah, that can really make a big difference.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. Now, we've got a couple of good questions happening here. So this is a good question. David says, can you recommend a template for contracts when engaging freelancers or contractors? That's a good question. Any resources out there that any of you have thought of, Anita or James? I know I've used the contracts form that you can download from Simmons Stewart, which is a legal firm.
Oh, I think that's the one I just got. Actually, I just Googled it as you were saying something, James. And so there's the link. I just sent it to Mary. I'll just send it to everyone.
Yeah, that would be the one that I would recommend. I think when we were starting our business, that's the first one that we went to, was the Simmons Stewart one. I think, don't quote me on this, I think MB do have employment templates on the MB website that you can get. I don't know whether they're just for permanent employees or whether they include contractors as well, but there are some standard kind of I think there's like a document builder, I seem to remember, if MB still have that on their website. But otherwise, Simmons Stewart is great, and you know, that's a really good resource, not just for contractor templates, but for a lot of small business templates that you might need to get access to. So yeah, I think we've all kind of come to the same conclusion that Simmons Stewart is the best.
Oh, yes. Well, they've obviously done a good job with all their marketing, because here we are. We hadn't even discussed that before the webinar. We've all thought of them. So, oh, that's jolly good. Okay, so yeah, we'd recommend you visit Simmons Stewart, and those are free, which is wonderful. And then Alan has a question. Alan says, are contractors more likely to upskill for in-demand work as a way to stay ahead of the game? Wow, do you know, I've actually been upskilling this week, Alan, I'd have to say. I had my list of things this year of I want to have Magnify running some webinars, and I've suddenly upskilled and done an awful lot of training. So I think there's a real place where contractors do that. What are your thoughts, Anita and James? What do you think, Anita, about that?
I really like to know my stuff, and I pride myself on doing a good job and knowing my stuff. So if I am brought in to do a job, then I'll be doing my research or talking to people in the field before I come and do it. I can pick up new information quite quickly, and I'm not afraid to ask questions and link in with different people to build the knowledge that I need. But at the same time, if I don't know something, I'm very clear about it. I'm not going to come into a role where I don't know or have the capability to do it. I'm going to say, this is what I can do for you. This part of the brief I'm not so sure about. However, I could recommend that we bring in my friend blah blah to help with us. So yeah, I'm constantly upskilling. Like, for example, last year I mentioned I went to Europe. I did my PhD in German, and I hadn't been there for a while. So I went over and studied German language for 4 weeks, because one of my interests is building New Zealand's relationships with Germany, for example. So I'm constantly like upskilling, and I love learning. And I love, one of the real benefits for me of being in a variety of different kind of roles and on different topics is that you do learn about people, and being more engaged, and the more I step into this world of kind of entrepreneurs and creatives and everything. I'm just so inspired by all the people who are doing their own thing and connecting out and working towards a purpose. And you go to these things like the New Frontiers conference, and it's just full of all these energy of people who really want to make a difference and change the world and are passionate about what they do. And working on your own or working in smaller agencies, you often have the leverage and opportunity to do that and to really put all your energy into it, partly because of what James was mentioning before. You're not as engaged in those kind of monthly professional development conversations and climbing the ladder and all the kind of office gossip and all that sort of stuff. You're really quite focused. And so that's sort of my comments in that area.
Oh, brilliant. James, what thoughts have you got around contractors more likely to upskill for in-demand work as a way to stay ahead of the game? Any thoughts there at all for you?
Yeah, I think contractors and freelancers again are kind of very much starting to operate in, you know, what we call kind of like a T shape, where they might have one specialist area that they have deep knowledge in, but then they have a broad set of skills that they can apply. And we're seeing a lot of kind of T-shaped people out there in the market who maybe will spend some of their time in that deep specialism, but they can also quite happily work in these other areas. And particularly times like this, where potentially people might not be working as much, we're seeing people start to get deeper knowledge in those more peripheral areas of their skill set, as a way of almost, again, de-risking their kind of ability to earn income when we come back off level 3, level 2, etc. So I think absolutely contractors and freelancers are kind of, just by their nature, are lifelong learners. You know, they're very used to coming into a client site knowing very little about them and having to very quickly pick up the lay of the land, how the business works, in order to drive that value. And I think where required, you know, contractors and freelancers should always be looking forward and saying, well, what are the parts of my skill set that I need to develop in order to make myself a more saleable proposition? Because the roles that you are able to apply for are only as good as the skills on your CV. You need to be saleable across a whole broad range, because then that allows you sort of more breadth when you're trying to find a new role. And for instance, we have sort of, you know, business analysts might be trained Scrum Masters, and so therefore might be able to operate in 2 slightly different specialisms, or might even have some project management training. And so that is another avenue that they could kind of apply for roles in. And so I think having a portfolio of skills and being kind of broadly T-shaped is something that's an absolute must for an independent earner. So I think certainly we see a lot of contractors and freelancers where one of their key sort of go-tos is self-learning and self-paced learning. And when they look at what they're doing with their time, I think quite a lot of them will be saying, well, as I'm sure Anita does, I'm going to carve out some time in my week to improve something, to learn something about something else that I can add some value to myself and to any particular clients I'm working for. And we see a lot of that with people who start using Henry, because prior to Henry existing, a lot of people had to do things like reconcile accounting software and send invoices and do all of that kind of financial admin. But now they might have, you know, 2 or 3 hours back in their week that they can start to say, well, what am I going to do with all of this extra time? I'm actually going to invest it in doing some reading, doing some studying, or you know, doing some online courses. And I think that's a really exciting prospect for freelancers, because it adds strings to their bow and makes them more saleable.
Which is great. And I think too, I know quite a while ago I was working with a company that helped people with training, and sometimes you'd get a very highly skilled contractor in, but the organisation wouldn't want to train the contractor, and yet the contractor might need this particular training. And sometimes, you know, training's not always low cost on the internet. Sometimes it's really expensive. So you'd be in a situation where you'd have an organisation that would send their own employees on a course worth 2,000 or 3,000, but not send the contractor, and somehow the contractor was expected to shoulder that burden. Do you think as well that that's, you know, sometimes there's a perception that contractors do get very highly paid, and sometimes they do, but that's all part of it, isn't it? Is that there's this expectation that you will keep learning and investing yourself, and you'll bring that deeper knowledge. Yes.
Yeah, I think a lot of the organizations that we would speak to, I think, have quite a pragmatic view on this, which is for a lot of contractors, they'll say to the contractor, hey, look, we have this training, it's, you know, $3,000 or whatever, and they would probably go halves with the contractor, and they'll say, you might get some benefit when you're not working for us of doing this thing. Obviously, if it's a very specific bit of training that is absolutely just related to that business, then you know, things might be different. But if it's something that the contractor will get some ancillary benefit from outside, a lot of organizations and a lot of contractors would suggest, hey, look, why don't we just go halvesies? You know, we'll just, you know, make it cheaper for everybody, but still get the same amount of value. And again, that way is an organization treating a contractor as though they're a valued member of that organization, and also assembling a kind of trained pool of contractors. I mean, one of the challenges that I think some organizations have is that they view contractors as some kind of homogenous blob that are all exactly the same, whereas the smart organizations will look to craft a set pool of contractors that might be 5, 10 or 15 people that are trusted, trained, they're known to the organization, because those are the people who are even faster at coming up to speed. If you have someone who's worked for you for 6 months prior, has already been trained on your tools, who you didn't require any longer, and they've gone off and gone through another contract somewhere, and imagine you need that person back, you want to be able to go and attract them straight away and say, hey, we've got a role opening up, we really want you to come back for this thing. You want them to drop whatever they're doing and come back to your organization, because they instantly drop in and carry on where they left off. And so suddenly the organizations have to think really carefully about the choices they make when it comes to treatment of contractors, because if they don't treat a contractor right, that contractor is going to go, no thanks, I'm working for this client over here, and they welcome me into their organization. And I think, you know, there's that quite inaccurate perception that contractors are more expensive than permanent staff, when actually, if you actually do the numbers of once you pay for someone's sick leave and holiday pay and KiwiSaver and all of the training and everything else and equipment, really, for some people, there's very little difference between the costs of the two. So I think it's about, again, organizations changing their mindset on how to be an agile and dynamic organization, rather than kind of putting everything back on the contractor.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah. I was going to say, we're coming up towards the end of our time. I think we've probably pretty much wrapped up. How does the future look for organizations and businesses who engage contractors? We can touch on that. There's just one question. Rod, thank you for waiting patiently. Rod says, when approaching a new client, how do you start the pay rate conversation? So shall we answer this question and then we'll just wrap up? How would that be, everybody? We'll certainly make sure that you've got your link to listen to the recording again, and to be able to get hold of Anita or James or myself if that's helpful. So Rod's question, when approaching a new client, how do you start the pay rate conversation? Well, any thoughts there, team?
Anita, why don't you go first?
Well, to me, it totally depends on the job. If I'm going for a government policy role, then that kind of stuff is mediated through a recruitment agent. So you just have to discuss with the recruitment agent what rate you think you should get, and then they do the negotiating or the talking on behalf of you. So that process is sort of quite clear when it comes to government policy roles. If it was a new client, then I would probably be having coffee with them first and figuring out where they're, what's keeping them up at night, or what their needs are, what kind of problems that I can help solve, and then providing them with some solutions to that and kind of sizing it up. And then probably after that, I would be thinking about whether the kind of solutions that I could provide would be better answered by an hourly rate, or maybe just a project price, or whether it's an ongoing kind of thing. I mean, I have some numbers in my head for different kinds of projects and what I would tend to charge. But I would probably tend to do scoping. I mean, sometimes people just come to you and go, I've got this kind of work, what do you charge? So you just answer the question, but it can kind of depend on what the project is.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. I mean, I remember when I was contracting, I would have probably a couple of variables that I would have in my head. I would have sort of a, for starters, I would, if someone was looking to take me on for a longer contract rather than shorter, you've got that kind of volume-based discount of actually I will reduce my rate for the certainty of certain work. So I had an organization that for a period of time just bought 5 days a week of my time, and I was willing to sort of adjust my rate accordingly and say, well, since you're buying literally 6 months of me full time, I will adjust the rate that I'm willing to work for, because obviously there's a big commitment being made on both sides. Whereas for another organization, I started doing maybe half a day a week, and there was no sort of ongoing commitment from their side as to what that work might look like in the future. And so the rate was slightly higher. But then I'd also have this other variable I factor in, which is how much I wanted to work at that organization. And I would be willing to compromise price slightly if I thought that I was going to get actual value back as well, that I was going to be working amongst people who were really smart and really driven, and that I could be actually enjoying the feeling of working, because it isn't just a financial decision, especially if you're going to spend 5 days a week somewhere. You need to feel as though actually you're going to enjoy that working environment, and an extra sort of $5 on your rate is not going to make that much of a difference if you're having a miserable time doing it. So I think it's about weighing up the length of the work, the value of the work that you're going to get as well, and your enjoyment of working at that client, and actually just using those things to kind of almost have a little bit of a formula in your head that allows you to get some consistency around pricing.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that as well, especially about thinking about the value that you're delivering and how can you fairly be compensated for that, and how can you show your appreciation of that particular client that you're enjoying working for, that's committing to you, that's really letting you into their team. Well, shall we wrap up, guys? One of the things we did say is give a quick summary on what's the future for freelancers and contractors, and for the organisations, businesses who engage them. Just 2 or 3 sentences. What do you reckon, James?
I think it's a very exciting time for all concerned. My big kind of priority at the moment is being able to be a representative for freelancers and contractors as a whole, and talking to a lot of organizations to just try and shift that mindset slightly towards more agile ways of working. I think the contractors and freelancers themselves are ready. I think there's a bunch of organizations that are ready, but I think there's a little way to go with some of the maturity of the organizations as to how to genuinely get the most out of contractor and freelancer resources.
Oh, brilliant. What do you think about the future there, Anita? What are your thoughts, please?
Well, in some ways, I think like this period is almost like New Year's Take 2, where you have that chance to kind of step back and think about what you want and where you're going next, and how you might have to adapt. So I think there's an awesome opportunity for organisations and for freelancers out there to, you know, really combine their skills and to really push New Zealand organisations forward. So I would hope to see everyone sort of taking advantage of that, and, you know, the growth of the gig economy could really help in New Zealand's COVID-19 response, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I'm just going to have another go at sharing my screen. Thank you all for your patience and kindness. I hope you can see that now.
Yes, yeah, you can. Yep.
Oh, brilliant. That's great. Okay, I can't get rid of the rest of them. Let's just go there. Okay, sorry. Skip through again. Skip. There we go. So everybody who's registered, we'll certainly be sending you out a link to the recording of this. And in fact, we couldn't have even run these webinars without contractors, because I've had to get a guy called Anthony up in Auckland to help me set up a YouTube channel, and we've had Iona quickly whack a couple of web pages up. We've had Jane do some graphics, and it's amazing how the contractors all came to the party and really helped. So if you'd like to talk with any of us further, here's some email addresses, and I shall certainly put that into the letter that comes out, the little email that comes out to you all to thank you for coming along today. It'll probably be tomorrow when we send that out, because Anthony's very kindly put aside some time to tidy up the recording for me, which is great. So look, thanks everybody so much for coming along to today's Sales War Chest webinar, learning about how contractors and freelancers can really help New Zealand move forward post-COVID-19. And special thanks to Anita Perkins from Anita Perkins Consulting, and to James Fuller from Henry, just for your contribution and your thoughts, and for coming along today. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Mary.
Thanks.
Okay. Right, so we'll stop now, and we'll pause recording.